Senator King.
Mr. Secretary, I'm somewhat puzzled. I grew up in Virginia where Robert E. Lee was revered. I think when I was a kid, his birthday was a school holiday. But as I grew older and learned more about American history, I learned that he fit the classic definition of a traitor. He took up arms against his country. He broke his oath as a member of the United States Army, which he took upon entering his career at West Point. Why are you going through these incredible gymnastics, finding current soldiers or other soldiers to rename? And you slipped a minute ago. You said we're returning these bases to their original names. Robert E. Lee, leading general of the Confederacy, Pickett, the other names. Why are you doing this? I don't understand what the motivation is to rename bases for people who took up arms against their country on behalf of slavery. What possible motivation can there be for this? Who is telling you to do this? Who is urging you to do this?
He was speaking as someone who had been immersed in it, who had lived among people who revered Lee, and who nonetheless could not deny the truth when he saw it. Lee had sworn an oath to the United States as a military officer at West Point, an oath to defend his country and its Constitution. But when the moment of truth arrived, Lee broke that oath. He raised his hand not in defense of the Union, but in rebellion against it. He joined a war not for freedom or independence, but for the preservation of slavery, the cruel institution that kept millions of black Americans in chains. King did not mince words when he pressed the Secretary of Defense. Why, he asked, would the United States military, the institution sworn to protect the nation, continue to honor men who had taken up arms against it? Why would bases, symbols of American strength and sacrifice, still carry the names of generals who betrayed the very country they once served? It was more than puzzling to him. It was outrageous to King. The idea that soldiers would train and serve on bases named for traitors was a distortion of national values, a signal that the country had not fully reckoned with its past.
Senator, the veterans and service members across the country who have deployed from Fort Bragg or Fort Benning or Fort Hood or Fort Pickett, there's a legacy, there's a connection to those bases and to those places, to what they trained for there, what they did for, and what they came home back to. That matters to them. Ask enough of them, as I do, all the time, before and later. And we recognize the service of those who were put into the replacement. No one's disputing that. I would never dispute that. What we're looking at is erasing history, erasing names, erasing base names that service members are tied to. Talk to people that serve at Bragg. Ask people that serve at Fort Bragg or Fort Benning if they like the fact that the names have been returned. And to a man and to a woman, they will tell you, thank God we're back to Fort Bragg, and thank God we're back. And thankfully, because so many men and women in this country have served, there's a Benning and a Bragg and a Pickett and a Hood has a Silver Star or a Medal of Honor that we could rename the base to because of the limits of what Congress allowed us to do. So this is something we've been proud to do, something that's important for the morale of the Army, and those communities appreciate that we've returned it back to what it was instead of trying to play this game of erasing names.
We're not erasing.
The Secretary emphasized that these bases had become more than geographical locations. They were touchstones of memory and community, tied to the blood, sweat, and tears of thousands of Americans who served. When he spoke with veterans or visited these installations, he said the sentiment was nearly unanimous. Men and women who had spent years of their lives there did not want to see the names erased. According to him, when Fort Bragg's name was restored, service members expressed relief and gratitude, saying it felt like home again. The Secretary framed the move not as glorifying Confederates, but as respecting the lived experiences of America's modern soldiers. This argument rested heavily on the idea of continuity, of preserving traditions that connected generations of military families. Changing the names, he said, risked erasing those traditions, erasing the pride that soldiers carried with them long after they left the bases. He insisted that the decision was not about politics or nostalgia for the Confederacy, but about morale. Soldiers, he claimed, deserved to see the names they trained under, fought under, and came home under remain intact because those names had become part of their service legacy. At the same time, he pushed back on the accusation that this was a denial of history. In his words, it wasn't about erasing history, but recognizing it. Recognizing the mistakes of the past while still respecting the communities and soldiers tied to those places. He reminded the committee that there were countless American heroes, decorated soldiers with silver stars and medals of honor, whose names could just as easily be placed on the bases. But Congress had limited the scope of what could be done, leaving the Pentagon with few options. Within those limits, he believed the right choice had been made, to honor the voices of service members who did not want their base names disrupted.
We're not erasing history, Mr. Secretary. We're recognizing history and recognizing that mistakes have been made in this country. The greatest of all was the Civil War, where people took up arms against their country on behalf of the institution of slavery. And to continue the practice of recognizing those people and honoring them by the naming of these bases is, I believe, an insult to the people of the United States. Let me talk about the budget. I don't understand why the budget is coming to us in two pieces. Why not give us an honest base budget instead of putting a piece of it in recognition, in reconciliation? As I understand it, OMB is saying we're going to have a flat defense budget for the next 4 or 5 years. Are we planning reconciliation every year from now on? Why not give us an honest budget telling us what your priorities are, and then we can consider it. This committee always works in a bipartisan basis on a defense budget. We all want to see some increases in the defense budget, and yet you're giving us this this fake, here's a piece of the budget, here's another. You're cutting, in the base budget, you're cutting shipbuilding in half and saying, well, we're going to make it up in reconciliation. Are we going to have reconciliation every year, which basically, by the way, puts a significant part, 10 or 15% of the defense budget, in a wholly partisan decision-making process, whereas in the history of this committee, it's always been bipartisan. Why are we doing it this way?
Senator, from our view, the budget number 961 meets the requirements and threats that we face. And
that's not the number. The number is 892.6. You're adding reconciliation. That's my whole point. Why not give us a base budget of 961 or whatever the right number is, what you consider the right number, and then we can operate and make our decisions. Why do it in this bifurcated way that really is fooling the American people about what the defense budget is?
Senator King's frustration shifted quickly from Confederate names to another issue that cut to the heart of government accountability, the defense budget. With a sharp and unwavering tone, he accused the administration of presenting a misleading picture of military spending. On paper, the Defense Department claimed the total budget amounted to $961 billion, a figure that seemed to show strength and precision in meeting national security needs. But King revealed what he considered a troubling truth. The official base budget, it was actually closer to $892 billion, and the rest of the money was hidden in reconciliation bills. To him, this was not a simple accounting strategy, but a deliberate attempt to disguise the real numbers from Congress and, more importantly, from the American people. The senator's outrage was rooted in his belief that the defense budget had always been handled on a bipartisan basis. Historically, Democrats and Republicans alike came together to ensure the military was properly funded, recognizing that national defense should not be a partisan bargaining chip. But by funneling 10 to 15% of the budget into reconciliation, the administration had, in King's view, pushed a significant portion of military spending into a process dominated by partisan maneuvering. That meant the spirit of cooperation, which had long been the hallmark of the Armed Services Committee, was being undermined. Instead of full transparency, Congress was only given a partial budget to review, with critical pieces withheld and moved into a separate, more politically charged process. King pressed the Secretary of Defense with blunt questions. Why not just present the full number from the start? Why not deliver a straightforward, honest budget that reflected the total spending needs of the Department of Defense? To him, this two-part approach felt like a shell game, a way to make cuts appear smaller than they really were while hiding costly additions in the reconciliation process. He was particularly incensed that shipbuilding had been cut in half in the base budget, with the promise that it would be made up later in reconciliation. To King, this wasn't just confusing, it was deceptive, leaving lawmakers without a clear understanding of the administration's true priorities. The secretary tried to defend the approach, insisting that the $961 billion figure was accurate and sufficient to address the threats facing the nation. He claimed the two parts of the budget still amounted to one unified strategy, not a trick, but King would not let it go. He interrupted to stress that the base number was what mattered in the eyes of Congress, and that by separating the funds, the administration was essentially playing politics with national defense. The American people, he warned, were being fooled into believing one thing, while the reality was something entirely different.
Senator, this is a straight-up budget for the Defense Department, and it's a 13% increase over what Joe Biden gave us.
It is a two-part defense budget. Part of it is in reconciliation instead of in the budget that's being presented to this committee. This committee only has a partial review of the budget. I don't understand why we can't have an honest, straightforward budget instead of this son of Oko that you're putting over on us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.